Hello everybody! If you're a rising senior like me, you know what time it is. Time to start those college applications. I know it sucks, none of us wants to do it, but we inevitably have to get to it. So I'm here to guide you along my process and my journey. You obviously don't have to follow everything that I do. In fact, you don't have to follow anything that I do, but I hope this gives you more perspective on how I created my college list, what factors I used to determine to figure out my college list, things like that. And I'll try to provide as much insight as I can from someone who has been developing their college list for over a year now. So without further ado, let's just get started. Let's just get out of the way. What is a college list? Well, with how competitive college admissions has become, many applicants are having to apply to many different colleges in order to actually get admitted to the college that they want, or even be able to consider some of the colleges that they like. It's important to have this list so you can compare and contrast the different schools you're interested in applying to, and perhaps the different financial aid offers and the different pros and cons that they bring to the table. The first thing you want to do in creating a college list is just trying to consider who you are as an applicant. And by that I mean considering what your academic range is. So SAT, test scores, GPA. Are you a domestic student? Are you an international student? Do you need a lot of financial aid? Are you an underrepresented minority? Are you a legacy student at some institutions? Things like that. Knowing whether or not you have or you don't have any of these factors can significantly impact your chance of admissions, but also just your experience and whether or not you would actually like the colleges or not. I'll explain why for most of these reasons later, but for example, the difference between a domestic and international applicant. If you're an international applicant, many schools are need aware or more stingy in terms of financial aid for international students, so you might want to focus on schools that are more generous if you need a lot of financial aid. And if you are perhaps at a higher academic range with a really good GPA, really good SAT, maybe you don't have to consider as many safety schools, for example. For the next step, after I considered who I was as an applicant, I considered what I was looking for in a college. Now, this encompasses so many factors, and factors can vary from person to person, and only you specifically can weigh how significant that factor is to yourself. But everything I say here is from my experience and for the sake of example. So the two factors I mainly considered in choosing colleges were first, financial aid, and second, location. Really, that's the only two factors I really specifically looked for. The other factors I was pretty good with, but I'll explain why these two factors were so significant to me. So I'm an international student, and international students generally don't get a lot of aid from these colleges. Knowing my family's financial situation and knowing that international students usually have to pay the sticker price at these elite private colleges or out-of-state tuition at public colleges, I wanted to choose a place that would give me some sort of financial aid to lessen the burden. Therefore, I looked very closely into the financial aid policy of each college that I applied to, and I took that into heavy consideration. Different colleges will have different financial aid policies. So some colleges will have need-blind admissions, which is where they don't take your family income or your expected family contribution into account. And if you're accepted to the school, they will give you as much money as you need to attend to that school. So those type of schools are the most generous. I think there's around 100 schools that are need-blind to US students and 5 to 6 schools that are need-blind to international students in the United States. So that's the first one. Those are really, really generous schools, so I'd recommend if you're looking for a full ride, really research those. Next, you have need-aware schools that need 100% of aid. These types of schools are not as generous as need-blind schools because they will take the amount of money that you have into consideration in whether or not they should accept you or reject you as an applicant. However, that's not to say you can't still secure a significant amount of financial aid at these schools. If these schools do accept you, regardless of how much money you need, they will give you the entire amount that you request. Next, you have need-aware schools that might not meet 100% of need. And I mean, I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. They will take your aid in consideration, and they still might accept you, but they might not give you the full amount of financial aid that you need. Finally, you have merit aid, and merit aid can stack on financial aid. They generally don't take your financial need in consideration, and they just give you scholarships based on how good of a student that you are. One really helpful application that will help you during this financial aid process is using the net price calculator on each college's website and plugging in info about your income, your tax returns, things like that, and seeing the estimated amount of money that it would cost to attend these specific colleges. Most of the schools that I'm applying to are 100% need met, whether they are need aware or need blind, or they're really generous with their merit scholarships, so I can comfortably afford my college education. The next and final factor I considered was location. I really want a college experience in the city, and I know that sounds really stupid, like, well, you're going to college for the education, not the location, not the parties or whatever. But me personally, knowing myself, I'm a very hard worker and I'm applying to these top rigorous colleges that have pretty stressful work environments. So I want a location in the city to provide me an escape from all of that. I'm the type of person who really enjoys going out, like going to concerts, going to sports events, things like that. And I don't think I could get that experience in a rural area. Now, you could be the total exact opposite and hate the city and want peace and quiet in a rural area. That's totally up to you. That's why these factors are personal and you don't have to take my word for it. I'm just saying that me knowing myself, I need to be at least somewhat close to a city and be able to socialize with people, especially after this pandemic is over. Now, you may have noticed that one of the key factors that I didn't really significantly consider was academics, and I know that sounds terrible, but financial aid policy and academics almost go hand to hand with each other, because generally top colleges will be more generous and will have a lot more funding available for financial aid. So of course I care about the quality of education, but I know that all of the schools that I'm applying to are very strong in their own specific and unique ways that I think will benefit myself. Now, you might be different. You might have a lot of money to be able to afford basically any college in the country that you want, and you really want a place that has your specific major. Some colleges may not have the major that you want or the department that you want, especially if you're going to a really specific and niche major. Maybe your large state school might not have that. Or maybe not only do you want a school that has the major that you want, you might want a school that has the major that you might be thinking of changing to. Because I know a lot of my friends have no idea what they're going to major, and that's completely fine. You only have to declare your major by your sophomore year, but if you want the flexibility to be able to change your major, some schools make it a lot more difficult than other schools, especially if you're going from STEM to humanities, for example. Also consider school size. Do you want a really big state school that has a lot of school spirit, D1 sports, or do you want a really small town liberal arts type college experience and that small faculty to student ratio? Do you want a campus that's politically active, or do you want to stray away from that? Do you want a campus that's really religious, or are you atheist? Do you work well with a core curriculum, which sets out guidelines and requirements for your major? Or do you work well with an open curriculum, like at Brown or at Amherst, where they might allow you to design your own major? Are there any schools with professors that you are particularly interested in learning from? And do those schools have strong alumni networks that may be able to grant you connections and secure you employment once you are out of school? All these factors are important in their own right, but again, it's up to you to weigh how significant they are to you. Some of them you might not care about at all, and that's totally fine. So now you've got all your factors considered. That's going to require a lot of self-reflection and perhaps a lot of conversations with your parents and your friends, and just conversations with yourself. I know I didn't figure out what I wanted in a college immediately, so once you get there, it gets a lot easier. Now you want to actually go into researching the colleges and finding out the colleges that you'll put onto your college list. So for this step, I made a college Excel sheet with all of the attributes and schools that I was thinking of applying to, and I also made a Google Doc with pros and cons for each of the colleges that I was interested in. Now, I would recommend making a preliminary list, just putting every single college that even slightly interests you and the tiniest bit, maybe you talked to an admissions officer, or maybe you know an alumni from that school and they gave really glowing recommendations. It's okay to have a crazy amount of colleges on your preliminary list, because as you research more and more about these colleges, some of them will lack the factors that you want in a college, and so you're just going to take them out immediately once you find that out. So my preliminary list, I would say I had like 50 schools on there, and once I shaved it down, it got to the number where it is now, which is around 22, but I might have to look back at that. I highly recommend taking literal notes on every single college you research, because having those notes to reference back from is really helpful. Let me know if you want to see my note sheet or share some of the attributes I saw in the schools that I'm applying to. Just as a side note, when you're doing research, I know it's really easy to fall into this hole of College Confidential, Reddit, and those communities are, they are really helpful. They have a lot of information, but they can get so toxic. And I personally fell into the trap of comparing myself to these other applicants. I talk about it in this previous video, but please don't do that. Just use these forums in order to gain information and perhaps look up AMAs from current students at the schools you're interested in, or even alumni and admissions officers at those schools. That being said, the best sources of information about these colleges are from these colleges themselves. They have tons of information available on their websites. That way you can look up if they have your major available, and you can look up the professors that teach there. I know with the whole coronavirus situation, it's kind of difficult to tour campuses, but there are virtual college tours that will allow you to experience the campus through your screen. I also, while I was researching these colleges, I looked up their campus on Google Maps. So I looked up what was near the campus, where I could hang out with my friends, where I could go study, things like that, if they were near a major city. And yeah, if possible, if you know some alumni from that school, perhaps a teacher, a relative, a friend, reach out to them, ask as many questions as possible. Even online, if you go through Facebook groups or Reddit forums, you might find an alumni and hit them up, ask them some questions. Usually they'll be very happy to answer all the questions that you have about their school. So once you've got your research done and you've got your preliminary list going, that's basically the bulk of the hard work. Now you want to separate it into safeties, matches, and reach schools. A safety school is a school that you're basically guaranteed to get into, whether that be because your academic range is significantly higher than the average there, so comparing your SAT average to the school's SAT average, or if they have automated admission. Some schools will just accept you automatically based on your GPA and SAT. Generally, these safety schools are not as academically competitive as your match or reach schools, so with your safety schools, you want to look out for money. Honestly, a lot of these safety schools will give you a ton of money. I know schools like the University of Alabama and the University of Arizona give automatic scholarships based on your SAT and GPA, and it's a huge amount of money. I'm talking $30,000 for out-of-state students. So your safety school might not be your state school, which it entirely could be, but I do think that there is a myth that state schools will always be cheaper than out-of-state schools, which is not necessarily true if you keep these scholarships in mind. One thing I also looked into when I was looking for safety schools was their credit policy, how lenient they were for AP exams. A lot of my reach schools don't even give credit for all the AP classes that I've taken, but my safety schools give a ton. So not only would Arizona give me a ton of money, it would also allow me to graduate early and be able to afford extra funds and time for graduate school. So that's what I really like about my safety school. I think something that is important to note though, that your safety school is supposed to be a school that is your safety net. It's in the name, and you have a higher likelihood of ending up at. So if you don't get accepted into your match, your reach schools that are more competitive than your safety schools, you have to really like it. It's not just a band-aid there. You have a likelihood of ending up at that institution. And if you don't like that safety school, I don't think there's a reason for you to put that safety school on your college list. So generally, I would aim for 1 to 2, maybe 3 safety schools on your list. The next category is your match schools, and with match schools, you have like a 50-50 chance of getting into the schools. You probably would get in, but you're not quite sure, and your academic range falls into the 50% of the students that are accepted at that school. Personally, this is the most difficult category for me, just because I like my safety schools so much that I really would be happy going there, and I feel like there would be no point of me paying more to go to the match school that I'm really not that happy about. However, again, your situation is different. A lot of match schools will still give a lot of merit scholarships and a lot of financial aid for students, so it's important to not disregard this completely. The benefit of a match school is obviously that they are generally more academically competitive to safety schools, but I feel like, yeah, this is just really tricky to navigate. So personally, I only have like one match school on my list. Slightly controversial, I know, but my situation is kind of different since I am an international student. So again, varies from person to person. My friends who are seniors generally apply to 3 to 5 match schools, so take that as you will. Finally, you have reach schools, which have averages that you could probably assume by now that are generally higher than your academic range. I will note, however, even if you are higher than the average at Ivy Leagues or top 20 colleges, I wouldn't be able to call any of those schools my match schools. So yeah, don't get too cocky and think that you're automatically going to get into an Ivy League school if you have a higher SAT than their average. With reach schools, you probably will not get in, but there is a small likelihood that you will. So generally people will apply to way more colleges in this group. I mean, my list is 2 safeties, 1 match, and like 19 reaches. So it's really skewed. But I mean, you can balance it out more within your liking. But with reach schools, again, you also have to really like these schools. And while they are all really amazing institutions, they have significant differences between each other. So yes, you want to increase your likelihood of getting into a good school. I would recommend you, while you're shotgunning, to choose schools that you still like. There still needs to be a tactical way to apply to these colleges. People will have different reasons to shotgun, whether it be because they're applying to a bunch of competitive colleges or they want to compare their different financial aid offers. Honestly, I know people online will look towards it negatively, but I need a lot of financial aid, I'm not gonna lie. So with my situation in particular, I think it makes sense to shotgun. Shotgun tactically. My personal opinion is that if it makes sense for you, shotgun. I know other people will disagree with me, but I'm happy to debate about it. You can leave a comment down below. Once you've researched and you categorized all of your colleges into safeties, matches, and reaches, and given each category their appropriate amount of schools, there you go. You should have a college list. And of course, the amount of colleges you apply to varies between person to person, but I hope you are happy with the list that you have. I hope in the future to be making more videos about my process and taking you guys along this slightly terrifying journey. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or any suggestions for my future content, leave a comment down below. Remember to follow me on my socials and listen to my podcast, read my blog, etc. All the plugs in the world. But yeah, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.